All right, it's 5:30. We call this meeting of the Rockbridge County Board of Supervisors to order. We'll have we'll have roll call first. Randy.
Supervisor Lewis.
Present.
Supervisor Ayers. Here. Supervisor McDaniel.
Here.
Chairman Lyons.
Here. At this time, Mr. Lewis is going to lead us in an invocation, and then we'll follow up by the pledge.
We pray in peace that our prayers may be received, and that we may be granted the knowledge and understanding to do those things we ought to do, and have the grace and courage to faithfully accomplish them for the benefit and welfare of the citizens of this Rockbridge County. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For the Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Executive Order 72, persons who have been fully vaccinated for the COVID-19 virus are not required to wear a mask. We'll hold citizen comments near the beginning of the meeting. We'll do our best to take citizens' comments remotely. There are two options for citizens to offer comment. The first is to join by telephone. You may dial in one of the numbers listed on the county website. Webinar ID and password are there for your convenience. Citizens wishing simply to view the meeting live or after the fact can do so on the Rockbridge County Board of Supervisors YouTube channel. Also available on the county website. If you wish to make a citizen comment as a Zoom meeting participant, you will use the raise your hand feature. You can press the raise your hand button on the bottom of your Zoom window or press *9 if you are calling in by telephone. Are there any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Do we have any recognitions or presentations? No, okay. Citizens' comments. Is there anyone signed up to speak in person?
No, sir.
Okay, anyone via Zoom?
Don't have anybody with a hand raised.
Okay, any emails that need to be read into the record?
No, sir.
Okay. Taken that everyone has had a chance to review the minutes from July the 14th and July the 26th. If so, are there any changes or do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second. And Ms. Ayers,
Yes.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes.
Yep, Mr. Day on the line.
Oh, Mr. Day, welcome.
I'll abstain since I missed the last meeting, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Consideration of the county financial package, Mr. Bolster.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. If you go to your financial package, you'll see the first document is a memo. And I'll go ahead and read through the activities for the Commissioner of the Revenue. He is preparing personal property file to send to the NADA for pricing. Of course, those will go out, the personal property tax bills will go out in November, or not November, in September. Those will be due in October. He's also doing, he's manually doing pricing adjustments for those items that are not available through NADA. He has presented the 2021 personal property tax bill to Ms. Travato, our treasurer, or plans to honor before August 20th. And then he will begin preparing the 2021 land use revalidation forms for mailing. And then, as he does every month, doing a reconciliation between the DMV report and local records. And as was mentioned last month, the general reassessment for the county began in July, and he continues to work with Wingate. And field work began, I believe it was last week, or not last week, I think it began back in July, about mid-July. As far as Ms. Travato, our treasurer, there's 3 items I'll read. And the last one, as you can see, Ms. Travato is here in the audience to present item number 4. So the treasurer's accountability that's due to the APA, that's the Auditor of Public Accounts, was completed and mailed July 22nd. We continue to have some debt set-off collections working through the state. You can see there's 11 filings, and if they get approved, that'll be $2,422 that comes down to the county for delinquent taxes. And then she did receive 3 supplemental batches for personal property taxes and 4 supplemental batches for real estate taxes from the commissioner. She has processed, posted, and mailed those bills. The first set, personal property, is due August 23rd, and the real estate is due September 7th. And with that, Mr. Votto is here to present the FY 2020-2021 uncollected tax report. A summary page was listed in the board docs package. Welcome.
Good evening. I have here the uncollected county taxes ending June 30, 2021. Our total uncollected is $11,508,245.47. And as you can see from your chart in the packet, that how it breaks out minerals and public service and personal property tax and real estate. Of that amount, $9,344,446.70 is your second half. So that's not due until December. So we actually finished this fiscal year with a lesser outstanding amount than last year, obviously. So we're in a good position there. The only thing that I would like to also note with this is that during this pandemic, we only had one auction. And in that auction, we incorporated something new, which was kind of like how the meeting is happening here today. We're using some website and online bidding, and things went really well. So we intend to keep that. So some of our smaller parcels that normally used to bring in $100 or $200, they wound up getting over 1,000. So it was excellent to see such participation. So are there any other questions that you might have on the outstanding indebtedness?
Just a comment. I thank you for your work in your departments. We see that the older delinquencies, amounts every year is coming down and down and down. So I can't help but think that's due to y'all's diligence. So thank you.
And would you like this, or would you like me to give it to Mr. Bolster?
And Mr. Bolter, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're not allowed to accept gifts. But
Right, next up, if you go to your handout, everyone was given a handout. If there's anyone in the public, there's a couple handouts up here. We had some updates. We were able to get updates today for the financial reports that are associated with the financial package. That includes the line chart and the bills list. And then we've got several funds that have some summary level reports. And then we also have the treasurer's report that's listed in the back of the handout. And so with the update on the line chart, basically our revenue lines were consistent with what was anticipated. Again, since it's the start of the fiscal year, the line chart is based on 3 years of data. So the 3-year look back generates a forecast for the current fiscal year. And so what happens in the past may not necessarily be what occurs month to month going forward. As far as the expenditures, you can see that we are above what was expected based on the 3-year look back. Some of this has to do with the fact that we do do have some increases compared to previous years. So think about cost of living adjustment, both for constitutional officers and their staff. So that was a 5% increase. We also had county employees received a 3% cost of living increase for FY22. And of course, those all have an impact on fringes. So, looking back, those things were not, typical, or not typical, weren't included in previous fiscal years. So one of the other big changes, or not changes, but impacts was like for the school debt, they had some adjustments based on their schedule, nothing out of the ordinary, it's just an increase on the debt schedule. And so that was up 314,000. And then we also were up 130,560 on the transfer to the ops. That's just a timing issue based on what revenues came in versus what they needed locally. And so the other thing to note is that typically, well, not typically, we pay our property and liability, LODA, Line of Duty Act insurance all in July. And so those are all impacts on the line chart for FY22. So the expectation is that we should see the expenditures come in line moving forward as we progress throughout the fiscal year. If there's no questions on the line chart, then I'll transition to the appropriation resolution. You can see there is a request for $31,848 for professional services. And that's to cover 2 invoices that we received this past month. One is from Gwen Waddell Carroll in Lockerbie, and the other is from Baycorp. And again, it's they provided us legal services on a couple cases that the county is involved with. And so those were not in the budget for FY22. And so the source of this money will be unassigned reserves at a total of $31,848. With that, you can see in your handout, there's a bills list, and there's 217 invoices on it. If you have any questions on the bills list, I can do my best to answer those questions. If not, the recommendation is to approve the appropriation resolution and pay the bills for the month of August.
Any questions for Mr. Bolster? Hearing none, you've heard his recommendation. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Day?
yes,
Mr. McDaniel?
yes,
The chair votes yes. Thank you, Mr. Bolster. Thank you. Consideration of employee bonuses.
yes. At the July 26th work session, I asked the board to consider revisiting employee bonuses. And to recap, last fall, the board supported bonuses for emergency responders, including law enforcement and fire and rescue positions. A number of localities in our region, ultimately then later in the fall, early winter, provided bonuses to all employees at varying levels, all administrative and everybody. So the cities of Lexington and Buena Vista provided $1,000 to all full-time staff and $250 to all part-time staff. I think they did that in later November of last year. The board at that time considered the potential to follow suit with county administrative staff, but determined to table the discussion until later in FY21 to see what revenues were going to look like. About the same time, the 911 board, of which I'm a member, discussed awarding bonuses to 911 center staff, and the reasoning being that they're public safety, and also that Lexington is their fiscal agent, was awarding bonuses to their administrative staff. That decision was also tabled until a final decision by the Board of Supervisors, and I reported that to the 911 board at that time. So in this past May, this topic was revisited by the 911 board, and of course that led to additional discussion with the board personnel committee, and to request the personnel committee staff was asked to present this information to the full board for consideration. And if the board was to offer bonuses in the same amounts that the Lexington and Buena Vista got, we'd suggest that in order for an employee to be eligible for a proposed bonus, he or she would have had to have been employed as of December 1st, 2020, last year, and have maintained active status until August 1st of this year. The total cost, as you can see in your package, is just under $90,000, and that figure does include constitutional officers other than the sheriff's department, which received a bonus last fall. At the conclusion of that report last month on the 26th, no action was requested because it was in a work session. Rather, it was added to tonight's meeting for consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have. The only difference, I think, between what we're putting forward here and the city's election in Buena Vista is we also thought it would be best to include seasonal staff as well at a lesser amount. The seasonal staff that worked through the pandemic last summer, and they would have had to continue to work this summer as well.
Any questions for Mr. Seward?
Did I say December 1? It's, I meant,
December 1.
I meant November 1. Sorry. Thank you, Ms. Huffman.
My only concern would be the people that we've brought on during the middle of this pandemic. And if you put a November 1st date, as hard as it's been to find good people, we brought people in December and January, and they've hung with us. I would suggest anybody currently working for us receive a bonus.
But would that include people that just started working for us?
I'd rather make someone happy and have them stay with us and put a date and leave somebody out.
Who are we including the seasonal then in this scenario? We're talking, we're giving lifeguards a bonus in that
I mean,
scenario?
if you were to include seasonal in it, then yes, it would be lifeguards and everyone.
Can we see what impact that would? I understand your intention. I completely agree with your intention. I don't know what a bonus, does a bonus, when somebody sees that they've been working with us for a year and a half or starting this pandemic, and the person that just got a job 3 weeks ago gets the same bonus, I worry that that doesn't backfire a bit and it feels as if it's not much of a value.
Well, and I think the question is whether you're tying a bonus to someone working through the pandemic, or if to Chairman Lyons' point, you're just trying to give everyone a little something extra. So I guess that's the question.
But I thought that's what it was bonuses due to the stress level of the pandemic and the people working during the pandemic. Thought that's what we were looking at.
That last fall, when the board first considered it, that was the original intent. Yes.
I mean, we just gave a 3% raise. And
Well, the pandemic began in what, March of 2020? So
Yes.
if they were working for it, why wouldn't we include if they were working for us in March? Why wouldn't we go back that far?
Oh, I thought
you were doing
I
it
thought
the
you
other
meant
way.
this March. Well, the only issue with that is
Oh, I understand
they would
better.
have to still be
Right.
They would have to still be working here, because otherwise you got all kinds of tax implications and that type of thing. I just want to make sure I understand what the recommendation is they had to have been working in November and then of last year, and then they have to still be employed as of a date, whether that's August 1st or whatever. I was thinking I was understanding that you were saying that they didn't have to be employed back then, but it could be somebody we hired this week.
Well, I think I was saying both.
Okay. Because it definitely would include anybody that was in March of 2020 that's
Right.
still working.
Yeah, so I don't understand the November 1st date. I guess it's confusing.
Well, it was, if you really wanted to.
Are we talking, which, November 2020?
November 2020. And we had to, and the reason we picked that date is because that's about the time that the bonuses prior to law enforcement, fire and EMS were awarded. And that's roughly about the time that the cities of Lexington and Buena Vista awarded, was mid to late November. So we just picked a date of November 1st and said, okay, because you have to do something pretty specific. Otherwise it puts us in a bad spot. We got to say, okay, you had to be employed on this date and you still have to be employed. If you didn't, it would be just everybody gets a bonus. That's still employed here. And I've run into this in other regional boards that I'm on up the valley. Bonuses were given and they got into some issues where someone retired or someone quit, 3 days before or a month before the bonuses were offered, and there had to be a hard and fast date. And that would be the November 1st date.
I have to agree with the concept that the spirit of this was pandemic related, and that's the source of the funds is, funds that we got to help with the pandemic. So I see Dr. Lyons' point, but I also think that the dates you've given us here are the ones that these funds should be used for.
What's the pleasure of the board?
I'm fine with it. I'm just saying, you get someone to come in last December. I mean, the pandemic is still going on. So.
Well, you could pick a date a little bit forward of that. I mean, if you wanted to, you could pick a date of January 1st. But at a certain point, we start getting to the point where somebody was just hired 2 days ago or whenever. I mean, we don't hire that many people, but
Well, seasonally you do.
yeah, seasonally we do.
And I'm not comfortable with that. You might be hiring somebody that worked for, that just working for you 5 hours a week and maybe was supposed to work for you for 20, but didn't show up. So I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that.
Potentially there's a compromise date here that, for example, January 1, or you could even say, you could even go as far as March 1, but again, to Ms. Ayers' point, then we get into a whole raft of people that were hired for some work in the summer. But I will say this, we've got some fantastic longtime seasonal employees that they come back every summer.
Is there any way you can tease that out?
It is in this one. If they worked last summer and they work this summer, then they're in. It's just a question of whether or not you all want to go with a November 1 date or push that forward a little bit.
I again, just literally, I think when we addressed it in November, that was sort of the pause date to see how things shook out. And we feel that we can provide this to those employees. And then that's sort of the time that at which we would have done it had we known into the future. But now here we are and we know we're good. So it seems to make sense to me.
Was that November's when we discussed it initially?
Yes.
And I like that date.
Yeah, and I think that's why Mr. Suter gravitated towards that.
Yeah, we had to pick a date and have a reasoning behind it.
I think this proposal, has the date, a good date, and the spirit of the source of the funds. So I move we approve as presented.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Day?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
Thank you all.
Consideration of fire rescue and sheriff's office pay rate adjustment.
Okay, so again, at last work session on the 26th, Chief Ramsey presented a recommendation from the Fire and Rescue Committee regarding pay adjustments for fire and rescue staff. You may recall that he found out about the adjustments in adjacent and surrounding localities in May, and that was after our budget had been adopted. And he soon began seeing issues in recruiting and retention of career staff in this pretty competitive field. And to summarize just briefly, the recommendation was to promote two positions, one of our lieutenants training lieutenant to captain, and the current captain to deputy chief, and also to provide an across-the-board 10% increase for staff, with the exception of the chief's position, which is recommended for a 5% increase. Subsequent board conversations at the July 26th meeting included discussion of the same issue being experienced by the Sheriff's Department. Since then, Sheriff Funkhauser has completed and remitted to the board a salary survey and proposal for an across-the-board increase of 10% in his department. Both the Fire and Rescue and Sheriff's Office studies and proposals are included in your agenda package. They're not in the same format, but they give generally the same type of information in comparisons. If implemented on September 1, the budget impacts for the current year to include salary and fringes. And I will say that the sheriffs did not have the fringes, but I talked with him and went ahead and added that. Fire and Rescue would be just over $80,000. Sheriff's Office would be just under $200,000 for a total of about $280,000 in the current year. The ongoing cost for the combined amount would be around the $335,000 range. Now, I can't give exact numbers because the fringes, will shake out, but we just use 25% on the fringes. Typically we use 35, but that includes insurance, so we don't have to factor that in here. Also, as noted in your board report, there's not been an across the board salary study for all staff since 2014. Human Resources Manager, Ms. Heidi Hoke, has already begun working on this to be prepared to present to the Personnel Committee, Finance Committee, and ultimately the full board for consideration during the 2023 budget. Chief Ramsey and Sheriff Funkhauser are here to answer any questions that you might have, and I will note that Sheriff Funkhauser is in a little pain. He was brave to show up tonight because he had a dental procedure, and thank you for being here.
Does anyone have any questions?
Questions. I have a couple thoughts.
Okay, well, I
We can
think,
get to that.
I think it's important to make sure everyone knows that this is highly unusual, but I think necessary, and that it's essential that before the upcoming budget, that we revisit all salaries of all our employees. And so they don't need to come lining up the door at the next meeting, because it's not going to happen. This is unusual, and it should be addressed in next year's budget. It's also important to note that when we review the salaries, we still are going to have to look at our public safety salaries, because this isn't a fix. It's a stopgap. It still doesn't get our public safety people where they need to be. But hopefully it'll be enough to deter them from having to leave and seek jobs that are higher paying within a short distance of us. Comments, Mr. Lewis?
Well, yes, sir. Basically the same. I'm frustrated, of course, that we're having to address this now when these things are better suited for budget discussions. But I understand we are where we are. It's been an issue. I have a pad here that I keep, that I bring the same one every time. And I was just going through my notes, and back in 2017, I was trying to figure out how we could support deputies and fire and EMS better. And I've struggled ever since then with how to pay for it. So that's the worrisome part to us, but I would remind the board that we do have yet another revenue stream coming up that might be a good source of funds for these type of needs, which I have also sat up here and preached for years, is we've got to provide the services that we have to provide to our citizens that they pay for, and they deserve the best. So we need to figure out a way to get there.
Other comments?
And I did put in there, the number includes September 1st implementation.
And keep that in mind, not so much for savings, but because our staff here, they're pretty busy, and it's going to take some time to get all this entered where it needs to be so that people get what they're
And
supposed to
That's
get.
And
that's as soon as we could do it, this September 1st.
for also, just want to take a look at the starting salary. This 10% doesn't bring us, it really doesn't address it. It absolutely does not address it. Same with fire and rescue. We have a serious problem with wages in our community. So,
And I will say that, and I understand the concern about doing this mid-year and piecemeal and everything like that, but we are seeing it across almost every area. Fleet services, it's,
We have been, and that's been the trouble, is figuring out how to justify it. So, but I think this stops it, hopefully, as Dan said, for the time being. So I'm certainly supportive.
All right, are there any other comments? Hearing none, is there a motion
I move we approve as presented,
on to start on?
September 1.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
And I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Day,
Yes,
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Ms. Ayers,
yes,
and the chair votes yes. Consideration of the opioid litigation approval. Ms. Huffman?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I've included in your report a breakdown of the proposed distribution of funds between the state and localities for any funds coming out of the MPL federal class action for opioid mitigation. The local share for Rockbridge County would be 0.235%. Of any funds distributed through the new opioid fund that's been set up by the legislature, 15% of the total amount available. This is going to come down in depending on which settlements are reached when. So we've had a proposed settlement from Pharma. We're expecting one from Mallinckrodt, who is also in bankruptcy, and we're expecting one in the near future through the big three distributors and Johnson & Johnson. So those are the ones that are really ready for distribution by the end of this calendar year. So the fund that has been set up for distribution between the state and the county is under the Virginia Opioid Abatement Act. And initially 15% of any share coming through goes directly to localities, unrestricted. There's another 15% that goes directly to the state. Then out of the 70% remaining, that all goes into the opioid abatement fund. Another 15% of that fund comes to localities. So localities are looking at direct payment of 30% of any awards that come through those channels. But that second 15% is restricted money. Then there is 55% that will be administered through the fund, and 15% of that is restricted for use by state agencies, 15% for use by the political subdivisions, 35% for regional efforts such as our CSB, and 35 is unrestricted and may be used for the authorities' staffing and administrative costs for distribution of these funds. The MOU sets out this understanding. There are a few more details in it, but I think this covers, I hope this covers what you're most interested in related to it. And there is a resolution included in your packet to approve this MOU, which is being circulated throughout the state among all localities, not just those who are participating localities, but all localities in the state as well as the Commonwealth. So if you approve it, you would adopt the resolution, the proposed resolution.
Any questions from Ms. Huffman?
No, thank you still for following through on that. Make sure we get what we can to help our people. Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion?
I move we approve as presented.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
A second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Day?
yes,
And the chair votes yes. Thank you, Ms. Huffman.
Thank you.
Broadband MOU.
Okay.
Suter?
So the first piece of this is just broadband discussion, and there's another agenda item to consider that. I'll do the best I can with this. This is shared with you all. It's kind of a fast moving, rapidly changing all the time. It's hard, but I think we're making some progress. So as I shared, there's an opportunity coming up in September to apply for state grant funding that is passed through federal money.
Spencer, could you talk into the mic? I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I forgot to move the mic over. Okay, so as I shared, there's an opportunity coming up in September to apply for state grant funding for broadband build out. And our goal continues to be trying to get broadband access to any business or residence in the county which does not already have it. What we've done so far is an attempt to identify all the areas that are unserved by at least 25.3 service. And as I've discussed before, 25.3 is not what I would consider to be true broadband moving ahead. I think gigabit is kind of the wave of the future, but that is what the federal and state folks identify as broadband at this point. As you know, RANA, in partnership with various ISPs, internet service providers, provide service in some areas of the county. That's been a good partnership and was kicked off by the county and the two cities and W&L and the Rockbridge Global Village played a big part in the planning of that, which is now VTS. Additionally, BARC Connects is steadily working towards provision of broadband to the door of all its customers who are not already served. Recently, Dominion Energy got into the broadband realm and wishes to partner with BARC Connects to build out middle and last mile service in the Dominion service area. Right now, the Dominion service area is our area that's most lacking. There are still some areas of BARC to be built, but Dominion has been the most lacking area. Per my report on board docs, I've worked on a memorandum of understanding with Dominion, BARC, and RANA. After some communications toward the end of last week and over the weekend, we think we have a final document or close to final document, although Ms. Huffman still needs some time to completed her final review, and we still need to get comments from the EDA, which is also party to that. Consideration of the MOU is the next step, or next item on the agenda. So for some background, Dominion has fairly recently entered the broadband arena, as I said. Their segment, what they deal in is the middle mile. They don't wish to be a last mile internet service provider. They're happy to build the middle mile in their service area, but require an agreement between the locality and an internet service provider. Dominion and Bark Connects have agreed to the concept for this relationship, that be formed between them, and with Dominion building the middle mile at their cost and Bark being the last mile internet service provider. As noted, in order for Dominion to commit to building the middle mile, they need an MOU from the partners. That's Bark, the Board of Supervisors, and the EDA. And I forwarded you a draft copy today. Hopefully you received it and might have even had a chance to look at it. In that document, we combined the EDA and the Board of Supervisors as the county, as the partner there. You'll note in that document that while mentioned in the recitals, RANA is not a party to the agreement. We'd originally included RANA. It became clear that Dominion can only partner with an ISP, and RANA is not technically an ISP. Rather, it's an authority providing open access middle mile to other ISPs, which serve the last mile and bill the customer direct. RANA's Valerie Jacato reviewed the agreement and agrees that it would serve no purpose really for RANA to be party to the MOU. Rather, I've been working with Bark and RANA to try to identify areas in the county, and especially in the Dominion service area, which would make the most sense for RANA to build with grant funds with some county grant match. I want to support RANA as much as is possible, as they're an important cog in this broadband wheel, as are their ISPs. Particularly, I mentioned BTS. In other areas that subject to the MOU, Dominion would build the middle mile at their cost, which can then be parlayed into an in-kind grant match to help satisfy grant application requirements of the upcoming VATI grant. Similarly, Bark will be bringing some in-kind match to the table, and we want to leverage these inputs as much as possible in a grant application. Ultimately, the plan is to finish nailing down the areas where RANA would build and the areas that Bark and Dominion would build. Then we've got cost estimates for each project would need to be generated, see how much money needs to be requested in the grant application and how much local match would ultimately be required. After that, we would include both the RANA and Bark/Dominion projects in the same grant application. That's the way we're looking toward this. And of course, the next agenda item, I'll ask for approval and concept of the document with the understanding that we may still hear back something from Dominion and the EDA, which still need to approve the final version. And as I noted, Ms. Huffman has had limited time to review as well. So there could be some minor changes. I just need the authority to execute an MOU. Finally, I do want to note that we are anticipating right now that with the amount of work that goes into this grant application and management, we may again call on the Central Planning District Commission to assist in the application. I know that was a lot of information, and I apologize for that. And it gets confusing, but that was the update, and I would like to answer any questions that you might have.
Would this take care of those few Dominion customers that are surrounded by Bark and haven't been able to get internet service through Bark because they're Dominion customers?
It would be our intention, and I don't want to write any checks I can't cash, but it's our intention to get the availability of service to everybody. We're still trying to identify some of the Comcast areas because what we don't want to do is overbuild somewhere that is currently being served. Obviously, competition is good, but we're also using tax dollars, whether they're federal or state or local grant funds. We want to target the folks that don't have 25/3 service now. And that includes the areas that are kind of those holes where that you just mentioned, the Dominion.
That definition of served is fairly important. Yeah, as you just clarified a little bit, but that's the issue there.
Yeah, a lot of areas. I'll take my house, for example. I mean, the best we can get on a good day is 7 meg download and probably, 500 upload or 1 meg upload. So, if you look at the federal maps, I'm listed as being served,
Mhm.
and that's just not right.
I'm listed as having self-service, and I don't.
I often don't have cell service and I live a mile out of town. So it's how much of the county do you think is considered served, but not really served?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I mean, as far as percentage or square mileage, I can't really I can get you that answer that we think, but that's kind of what we're trying to do. I'm trying to, the last piece of this puzzle, I'll tell you what we've done. We took the BARC areas out because BARC is building their areas,
Mhm.
and that's in consultation with BARC. And we took the addresses that are already served by RANA out, and we're trying to get any other, when I say by RANA's ISPs through RANA, we're trying to get the other areas identified, for example, the Comcast area. So, Comcast serves the city of Lexington, city of Buena Vista. They serve out into the counties, some too, Glasgow, and we're trying to nail down those areas. Can't give you the definitive answer, but there's
Right.
a lot of folks out there that are still not served.
But this process will identify that.
Well, yeah, we're trying to identify that now. It's
Mhm.
hard to get from some of the internet service providers. It's hard to nail down and get exactly where their service boundaries are. We try to get that information from them, and a lot of times it's not 100% successful. So in this case, in some places, we're just going to have to guess, and if somebody wants to challenge it, they can challenge it.
This does have to go to the SCC for approval of Dominion's part of this project. So that will be the opportunity for someone to raise their concerns. And I have given this an overview of, not detailed, but it looks pretty good to me. It's, I think the important point at this stage is that it's not a binding agreement. It's just outlining what the parties expect to see happen in order to get this grant application underway.
Mr. Suter has requested that the board authorize him to execute the MOU, subject to any moderate changes. Do we have a motion?
So move.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion?
The only thing, Mr. Chairman, I would ask, and I know this is just for the MOU for the application, a lot of things will be determined afterwards. There are providers out there, and I know providers bid on service areas, and providers will tell you they offer certain services. Once we get further into this and determine areas, there are certain providers out there that I would like to have them prove that they're providing the level of service that they say they are, because I don't think it is. And those customers, our citizens, need, just like Mr. Suter said at his residence, they need better broadband coverage. And so as we get further into it, I just hope that we push those providers to provide the level of service that they need to.
I'd like to add to that, and you're exactly right. And I was on a conference call this morning just about our pre-application process with the folks from DHCD, the grant folks, broadband folks in Richmond. And I posed that question because when you talk about the auctions, it's called an RDOF auction. I don't know what the acronym stands for, but some internet service providers will bid on a census block. And they will say that, well, we're going to take some federal money and we're going to bid part of our money. And with that, we will build that service area. We can't be sure that's going to happen. I did pose the question to the folks in Richmond, because if we just have to skip around those and not touch those census blocks, there's no guarantee that anything's going to get done, because there's been a lot of cases when an RDOF application is not panned out and folks have not gotten internet access, and it just drags on for years.
Well, they have 3 years to do anything anyway.
They do.
Once they do it, so.
As of 2016, they had 10 years to do it. So, which just boggles the mind, but in some of those auctions. So they've got 3 years to do something. The wheels turn slow, but what we're going to do is I think we're going to look at those, and where something looks like it's probable, we'll exclude that. But in some cases, if it's just a small area, we're just going to have to build through it. And if there is a challenge, so that there's two opportunities for challenge. One of them is the SEC, as Ms. Huffman has said. The other one is through the VADI challenge. These applications are published, and if a internet service provider wants to challenge that, they can do that through the VADI process. And if they do that, and they have every right to do it, and if they do it and they show that they're going to be building it, it's my understanding from my conversations is that they have to sign an agreement that they have to build it. And again, back to within the 3 years. I know that's not long enough, but that's all or it's too long, but that's about all we can do.
Okay, any other questions? We had a motion and a second. Mr. Day,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Ms. Ayers,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes.
So you've just taken care of the next item. Thank you.
The
We like to be efficient.
appointments to the Building Code Board of Appeals. We have 2 openings, and we have what I think 2 very qualified applicants. Hopefully the board members have had a chance to review or any discussion.
If there's no discussion, I would move we approve Mr. Beazold for the first vacancy listed.
The motion is for Mr. Beasley to fill the appeals vacancy, which terms expire on 7/31/2025.
Yes, sir.
Do we have a second?
Second?
And a second? All right, Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Ms. Ayers,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Day,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. And the second opening for the Board of Appeals is for the term that expires on 3/13/2024.
I move we approve Mr. Hickman.
We have a motion to approve Mr. Hickman. Do we have a second?
Second?
And a second? Any discussion? All right, Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Ms. Ayers,
Yes.
Mr. Day,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. I think, has everyone had a chance to review the monthly staff reports? Any comments, questions, or concerns?
I move we approve with appreciation.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Ms. Ayers,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Day,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Any comments from the board? Just a reminder, the county fair is coming up at the end of the month, and they're waiting to hear from Supervisors who wish to volunteer, I think Mr. Lewis has signed up for several days. That's good.
I hadn't got my full schedule yet, but I have spoken
If he
with,
wasn't, he is now.
with Ms. Vess. Yes, it's in the works.
Um,
Thank you for noting that, Chairman.
Okay, hearing no other comments. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes,
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second. Ms. Ayers,
yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Aye.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Day.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. We stand adjourned and the BRRA will start at 7 o'clock. We'll get you home early, Mr. Lewis.
I appreciate that. Again, I like the efficiency of it.
Now say you called and agreed on.
Have you recovered from your?
You
That was
too.
impressive.
I got a lot more to go.
But I don't see you at our pool, although occasionally you do. I see you signed in, but I haven't
know.
seen you actually physically there because we're times are
Right.
different.
I will be there tomorrow morning.
Good.
So Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays.
Good.
So, yeah, and I'll either do a quarter or half. Like, I'll run there, mid swim, and then I'll bike back.
Oh, wow.
And even though it's supposed to be swim, bike, run. I just can't. So Brett has to do that. Wishing you can travel.
So then you just have to worry about getting your bike to the pool ahead.
That's true. That's true. But I do now, because it fits in my truck. Okay? So Kathy will drive the truck.
Except
So I'll run there, she goes swimming, and that.
Hello.
Love having her.
Hey.
But no, I
Her family.
Not bad, not bad. I know.
Enjoy your vacation. All right.
Still don't know. I still don't know.
Anyway, so. Good to see you guys.
I see all this running and biking. I don't know how you do it. It makes me tired just looking at how far you go.
Decided to do the, Zoom.
Right, but for every downhill, there's an uphill. Yeah. Well, I guess on the bike, it's still.
Well, I need to be able
And running downhill, I think it's harder than running uphill.
It's all flat.
Yeah.
And it's a pool.
I was gonna say, where do they have you swimming? It has to be.
Yeah, Leslie, did you hear what happened to me at Smith Lake?
No.
Okay, so I got hazards. At 40. And I had no idea. Now, I'm an Army Ranger, but it's cold water. Never knew the cold water induced asthma.
Oh, wow.
So it's 15 degrees. I need 1 of 5 people not in a wetsuit.
Yeah.
I jump in the water, swimming great. I turn the first buoy. So I'm 300 yards into the swim. And my lungs stop.